I don't do drugs. I've lost a family member to drugs. I have a personal aversion to drugs, but I try to be objective when I ask this question. And I don't like drugs, but I'll ask it anyway. I think the mob missed the boat in the 80s when the coke boom was happening. They kind of had either their heroin pipeline or at the very least, maybe some remnants of the heroin pipeline, maybe 20-something cities. And the kind of maybe could have took over the coke game for distribution, got really powerful again, and got into the drug game. But they opted not to on any wide scale. Sure, they still do heroin, and sure, they were some pockets of drug dealing, but they didn't go knee deep into drug dealing like they were like in the heroin game, which they controlled. Do you think that was a mistake on their part to not get into the drug game, or were they smart for doing so?
Well, a good question. I don't have an easy answer to that. I think that you're smart probably not to get into it because it was then the target of the war on drugs.
Yeah.
And everything else that's been going on. From a business point of view, they probably missed the boat.
Yeah.
Because there was so much money to be made. Yeah. But then again, you're going to have to interface with, the South America, Latin America.
Outsiders they couldn't trust.
Outsiders that you didn't have a history with.
Yeah.
And whereas, the Sicilians and the French, through European connections, I don't know if they really had the ability to quickly maneuver and pivot into that, into the cocaine trade.
Got it.
And I guess by extension, the crack trade, but that was more of an urban phenomenon.
Yeah, good point. Now, Vito Genovese, was, I almost feel like, okay, so we talk about Costello, you talk about Luciano, Vito Genovese, although I think he lost his chess match at the end and that hurt his legacy, was probably one of the most powerful mafioso of all time on both sides of the pond. That's just my humble opinion. Obviously, at the end, he fell off. But give us some of the things that, our viewers can learn about Vito Genovese when they read your book. Obviously, we'll give links to all the different books. But what can we learn about Vito? And I'd like to hear a little bit about the time in Italy when he worked for El Duce.
Well, Vito Genovese, he came up at the same time as Costello in New York. They were both immigrants from Italian families. They really were in the same orbit with Luciano. And really, at some point, Luciano, I think, looked at both of them as capable people. And in fact, I think Vito was probably had the edge because he was a tougher guy.
Yeah.
Vito had no compunction about, shooting people, killing people.
Correct.
But Vito got into trouble with a homicide case in Brooklyn, and he had to leave because he was indicted. So he left and went to Italy.
Mm-hmm.
And in Italy, and he took a lot of money with him, by the way.
Yeah.
He became in tight with the fascist organization.
Which I don't get, but anyway, keep going.
Well, yeah, I don't understand either. I think he realized, Vito did, that you've got to, be with the person in power. You've got to be with them.
Correct.
There's an image I have in the book. I took it from the Catch-22 novel, nice. Where there's an old Italian man in a brothel.
Yeah.
And when I saw the film, I was so struck by that scene where the Italian man, he's about 107 years old or something like that in the book. And the American youth say, well, you're such an opportunist. You're with the fascists, you're with the Nazis, you're with the Americans. Don't you have any principles?
Yeah.
And the guy says, well, I am basically whoever is in power, I'm with. And, and I'm 107 years old. And how old are you going to be at your next birthday? So this was Vito's way, I think, of ingratiating himself with whoever had the power. He was also tight with the Nazis.
Yeah, that's also.
And then when the Italians, Mussolini was pushed out, and the Germans were.
He got in with the Americans.
He got in with the Americans. He became a translator for the American Armed Forces government. So he knew how to play this, but he could do his own rackets at the same time. He thought he was invincible. He was doing his black market stuff.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately led to his downfall in Italy because he did an investigation and they got him. They got him on that. And then they found out he had this case in New York, a murder case. So they sent him back and they had to face the music. Successfully, I might add.
Yeah. Well, he was interesting because he showed up, I don't know if it was his son-in-law, Duce's son-in-law, Mussolini, or his son, whatever it was.
Or Count Ciano. Yeah, Count Ciano.
Yeah, I think he showed up with like $1 million cash, was a lot of money now, a lot of money back then. And that got Mussolini's ear